Hey everyone, welcome to Inverted World. I'm your host Dylan Roth, and today I have a special guest. Her name is Jessica Mass.
She is the Global Ambassador for Survivor Care and Education
At Operation Underground Railroad, an organization that rescues victims of human trafficking and child sexual exploitation. OUR has helped rescue thousands of survivors across 30 countries and 50 US states. They have also managed to get over 4,000 predators arrested. These people are doing God's work, making a significant impact in the fight to end one of the most devastating crises affecting the world today. If you saw the movie Sound of Freedom, then you probably know the name Tim Ballard. He is the founder of OUR and the person that Jim Caviezel plays in the movie. The day after Sound of Freedom was released was the day that I revealed my secret of being sexually abused as a child. I really have to thank the people behind Sound of Freedom for inspiring me to come out with my truth and for prompting discussion everywhere about such a difficult topic. However, the impact that this film has had on people's lives, including mine, would not be possible without the amazing work that OUR is doing, and I'm very excited to be having someone from their team on our show. Leading the Aftercare program at OUR, Jessica is doing some crucial work with these survivors by helping them on their journey of healing from these traumatic experiences. We're going to be talking about how she got started on this mission and what she does day to day with these children. So without further ado, let's get right into it. Hi, Jessica. Thanks so much for coming on. This is such an incredible mission that you're on, such an important cause. So why don't you tell me a little bit about how you got started with Operation Underground Railroad?
Yes. Well, first of all, thank you for having me. I got an opportunity to watch a little bit of your channel, and it looks like you are a very passionate person, and I appreciate anybody that's out there doing things that they're passionate about. So thank you for having me on. I was 13 years old, and I grew up in Nebraska on a farm and really had not a lot of education and knowing a lot about things that were outside of my small little world there on the farm. And then when I was 13, I got the opportunity to go to Brooklyn, New York, and worked during the summer with some of the outreach programs that they had there, going into the projects and to the different areas of extreme poverty. And I really saw that there was a need for people to band together to be able to help those that are, whether it's drugs, alcohol, abuse, trafficking, things like that. And so when I was 13, it was my small little perspective on seeing outside of of my own world. And when I saw that, I really did want to start doing more of that, and that's when I felt like that was what my life was going to be dedicated to, was helping those that had been born into hard situations. And so it was a little farm girl with a lot of passion that thought that she could have some impact on the world. And then from there, I was involved with different things throughout junior high and high school with doing similar types of outreaches, and then in college was also involved with those types of things. But when I was in college was when I really started to see that trafficking, sexual abuse, things like that was happening literally in my own backyard where I was living. And so I got involved with the kids that were in foster care, and I started to see some of the things that they had went through. And sitting with those kids, I remember the first girl that I met when I was in college and started working with kids in foster care, she was 12 and she had just given birth. And she was telling me about how cruel people were to her, that they said that she was all these different kinds of things. And she was like, what people don't understand is that my mom is the one who made me do this. And at that time, I didn't even have language for trafficking. I remember being very confused as to, how could your mom make you do this? What does that mean? How are you 12 and you already have given birth to a child? And so that started my curiosity and continued my passion to help those that had been born into some really difficult situations. And then you fast forward a few years, and I started working for the foster care system, and then also became a foster parent. And the first little girl that lived with me, she was 6 months old when her parents started trafficking her, and this is in the United States. And they were advertising her on Craigslist, and they would have men show up at their door, walk downstairs, and they had their baby sitting on a table. And these men would purchase that child while the parents filmed it. And this child would be sexually abused. They would film this, and then they would sell it for child explicit material.
Wow. That is so heartbreaking to hear and disturbing. It seems that on these rescue missions and just in your history in general, you've definitely seen a lot of very, very shocking, disturbing sites, and I think this is part of the reason that it's such a difficult conversation to have. Tell us a little bit about what your role is at OUR once these kids have been rescued.
Yes, and you're right. It is a disturbing and very difficult conversation, and so for your listeners that are tuning in, I just applaud them for being willing to lose some of their innocence of thinking that this doesn't happen in America, and then also learning more about what happens globally. And I applaud those that are willing to lean into the conversation, because it is really hard to hear about what children could be going through and what they are going through right now. So
absolutely.
When a rescue happens or an intervention of some form, what our role is in survivor services is to really help them with rebuilding their lives. And that can look like a variety of different things. One thing that we try to always do is to have somebody there to help with survivors when a rescue mission is happening or an intervention is happening, so that there is somebody that's letting these kids know they're not in trouble. I think a lot of times when an intervention happens, whether that's in the United States or internationally, the first thing that a child thinks about is, I'm in trouble because the traffickers have told them and made them think and manipulated them to think that they're the ones that were choosing this and that they would get in trouble if anybody ever found out. So we try to make sure that that's not a traumatic situation when that intervention happens. And so right there on site, helping them know that they are safe, it's not their fault. And then from there, we have the philosophy that they're family for life. As long as they want us in their lives, we want to be in their lives. And so with the aftercare services or the survivor services, we provide services for the aftercare home if they're going to an actual home and they can't go back to their own house because a lot of the parents are involved in trafficking their children. We help build up the quality of care for those homes. That can look like remodeling an aftercare home. That can look like building a library or building a computer lab so that they have additional educational services. We've provided therapists before. We've helped kids that want to go to university be able to go to university and pursue their dreams. We've helped with, literally anything that you can think of, from the basic needs of food, clothes, shelter, to you want to become a lawyer. How can we empower you to be able to have the resources to go on to law school? So
wow.
When we first started with the aftercare services, it was really, how do we meet somebody where they're at and with what their need is, and really doing person-centered plans where it's all about them and what they need and what they want to do with their lives.
Wow. And are there therapists or people that are guiding the survivors with the psychological care for the trauma that they've gone through? What does that look like?
Yeah, and it's it's tricky because that type of therapist is going to be trained in sexual abuse and in trafficking and really understanding some of the things that they've been through, or at least having a lot of training on what they've been through. So yes, there's definitely therapists that do that. And we've even had therapists on our staff before that were specifically for survivors of trafficking. But yeah, it's a very specialized therapist. But yeah, there are therapists in the United States and around the world that we work with to help provide that ongoing therapeutic side of things to help with the things that the kids go through. I think one of the things people forget sometimes is once an intervention rescue happens, that it doesn't stop there in their minds, and what, you know, they're reliving this a lot of times, and nightmares, and thinking that a trafficker is going to come and find them and kill them in all these different situations. So having therapists is extremely important.
No, I can definitely imagine. And, you know, I know how difficult the healing process is, you know, and how hard it is just for survivors, for victims to talk about what happened. How has that been with the survivors you've worked with, and how they can talk about it?
Yeah, you're right. It's very difficult. And one of the things that I really appreciate about the team that I work with is that nobody makes somebody relive their story. So, for example, somebody doesn't have to share their story of what they've been through in order to get support services. And it's not, you give me your story, prove it, and then we're going to help you. It's, you're a survivor of sexual abuse, extreme exploitation, trauma, human trafficking, then let's help you with what you need versus making somebody relive their story. But with therapists, I think that if the survivor wants to talk about it with their therapist, I think that's an extremely important piece of their healing journey, but not something that somebody should say. In my opinion, I don't think somebody should ever say, you tell me what you've been through, then I'll help you with what you need.
Right. Yeah, and I'm sure it's a different experience for everybody. And there's so many different levels of trauma, and every victim's experience of what happened to them is a little bit different. And I would imagine there's a huge difference between kids that have been abused in these and exploited in these mass trafficking situations versus someone, say, who was abused by one person in their life, or maybe just one time. I was sexually abused when I was 16 years old. I came out with this secret 10 years later. So only last year I started to tell my friends and family, and but you know, I've been healing from it fairly well. So how does the experience of someone who maybe was abused by one person or just one time, someone like me, versus this systemic abuse in mass trafficking?
That's a great question. And one of the things that I can only say from the experience of people I've worked with is sometimes somebody's just been trafficked once, and it is extremely traumatic, just like it would be for somebody that had multiple levels of trafficking and multiple crimes against them. So I get careful with my words when I talk about it, but I will say that for those that have been trafficked for years, for example, there's a girl that I worked with, she was trafficked from age 5 to 15. So for a decade. And for her, she would have things that would come up in her adult life that she wouldn't have even remembered when she had started her healing process when she was 15. But as an adult, she was like, I was in survival mode for so long that I didn't even remember this extreme traumatic abuse situation. And now I'm remembering it and I'm having nightmares about it. And so from the experience I've had with working with survivors, sometimes what they explain is that they really have a hard time with the things that continue to come up because there's a multiple crimes against them. And sometimes people are like, well, work through that trafficking situation and then you're going to be okay. And from the survivor's perspective, they're like, I'm trying to work through it. There's just so much that a lot of it I don't have all the memories at once because I was in that survival mode.
I know that you aren't specifically in the rescue side of OUR, but were you ever on site during these missions, or is there anything you can tell us about the rescue missions?
Yes, I started with OUR in 2015, and so I've been here for a while, and I've been on lots of the rescue missions. I had the opportunity to get to see firsthand what some of those investigations look like in Asia, for example, and how our team really put together the evidence to work with the law enforcement so the law enforcement could actually do these arrests. And so then I've been on site many times when the survivors are first getting rescued and law enforcement just came in. Sometimes they would literally be breaking down the doors. Sometimes they would come in with several people from their police force. I've seen everything that you can imagine as far as what different countries have done as far as when they're doing their rescue. And what I will say is that I've worked in over 30 countries since being with Our Rescue, and working in all these different countries, I will say that I feel like with the law enforcement we've worked with, they continue to try and get more trauma informed, and they're trying to understand what does it look like when they're doing these missions so that they're not doing harm to the survivor. And one of the key components is having survivor support services right there on site when it happens. And with our different rescue teams and our ops teams that we have on our team, I will say that they do a lot of different investigations. They work hand in hand with law enforcement. We're not a black ops type of team. We always want to do things where we're going through the front door, never the back door, and really doing it with integrity. More kids can be rescued. I think sometimes when we hear about the awful things that are happening within trafficking, we want to go and kill somebody that's hurting a child. We want rage and revenge and to do something. And that, I think, is a natural human feeling that hopefully people do have, where there is a rage and there's an outrage of what's happening to these kids. And with our team, we try to take that rage and make it so how can we help as many kids as possible by working with law enforcement, by doing proper investigations, by getting all the evidence that we need in order to build a case so that the trafficker doesn't get arrested and then just get back out on the streets to hurt more children.
Right. And I'm sure after these rescues, like the trauma is just, I can't imagine what that's like. I mean, I know that the trauma of being abused, but to be, taken from place to place and person to person like that, that's just shocking. I mean, the thing about my abuse is, like, for so long I didn't register what happened to me as abuse, so that's why it took me so long to process it. Are there any survivors you encountered that didn't realize they were being exploited, or maybe they were just so young and weren't aware of what was happening to them?
Yeah, that's a great question, and that makes sense from your own experience, how you're like, I didn't realize that was what actually happened. And a lot of the survivors are trafficked by a family member, a boyfriend, even a spouse. And so for example, I was working with a woman who was in her 40s in the US, and she was being trafficked by her husband, and she didn't realize it. So her husband would say, go out, sleep with this many people, and don't come back until you are able to bring me that money. And he literally locked her out of their apartment until she would do this. So in her mind, he had framed the story as, you are just making money for our family, and you need to be responsible for paying your portion of our bills. And so when I was talking with her, she was like, this went on for years. They were married for 19 years. And so for her, she kind of thought it was just part of providing for her family without realizing that her husband was actually trafficking her. And I would say that there's lots of kids that I work with too, that they think it's their boyfriend, and they're just doing, that he loves her, and that the terminology is typically called the Romeo pimp, but it's the idea that, well, we're in love and I just need to do this because he's asking me to. And in reality, he's just profiting off of exploiting that person.
Right. And like with the victim's husband, I think when there's a family or a friend of a family involved, if it's a family member, there's a tendency for the grooming to be a lot easier for the perpetrator. And we've talked a lot about grooming on this channel. And from your perspective, what kinds of grooming tactics did you see from these perpetrators to the victims?
That is a great question. And I love to hear that you've talked a lot about that, because I think that educating parents, friends, school teachers, anybody in the community in general on what grooming is, so that they can identify that when a child might say something that then sends a red flag in our minds of, wait, that child might be being groomed. So some of the grooming things that I've seen before is I've seen a lot of having somebody fall in love with them first, so that they think that I heard a trafficker once reference how he was grooming somebody, and he said, if I can win their heart, I own their body. And what an awful thing to say, and what an awful manipulation of what love really is, and being in love, what that really is a beautiful thing. And so he manipulated that and would use that against these young girls and young boys of trying to make that situation happen. I've seen it where actually in my own community, something that happened was, here's a cell phone, and I'm going to start giving you these clothes. Do you want to go on a shopping spree? And making them feel very special, and then saying, hey, why don't you use that cell phone I gave you to send me some pictures? And for these young girls, it started in bikinis and then ended up being nude pictures. And how he did that was, well, I'm going to share this story when, maybe the person took their top off, and I'm going to share that story with that picture with your parents, or I'm going to post it online. Now all the kids at your school are going to see it. And so you have to send me more pictures and more pictures. And then a lot of times what these people will do is then they'll sell those images online for child explicit material. And so they start out with, here's a gift, you're so special, or whatever that person's vulnerability is exploiting that and really using these different grooming tactics. One other one I'll mention is that I've worked with a lot is kids aging out of foster care. And when some of the kids that age out, they don't have families. They don't have people that are pouring into them, that are loving them, helping them with rent as they're 18 years old and still trying to get their feet under them. And so then you have some of these kids that are living on the streets, and traffickers will say, oh, I'll help you out. You need a hotel room? I got you. Like, don't worry about it. Here's a hotel room, or here's an Airbnb I'll let you use, and I'll pay for it. but then they start to use that as a grooming tactic of, I'm going to fill in for that missing piece you don't have of a family. And then they'll start to exploit that, and then eventually selling them and using them for their own gain and own profit.
The gifting, being told you're special, that's all stuff that I encountered as well. And it's, being sucked into that when you're at such an impressionable age, it's so easy to go down that really dark road, and you don't even know what you're getting into. And what I'm curious is, are there any survivors that came to you on their own, that came to OUR on their own volition, aside from the ones that you rescued in other countries?
Yes, I'm actually really glad that you're asking that question. And I'm glad, because I want more survivors to be able to say, maybe OUR can help them. Maybe that is a resource for me to be able to reach out to. And so we've had so many survivors come to us that we had nothing to do with their rescue or their intervention, but maybe they just need somebody to help them with a little bit of case management. Maybe they need somebody to help with financial literacy, with, hey, do you guys have a course or a class that I could take to be able to get educated? Or maybe they just need us for a resource to point to another resource that we're aware of, because we try to collaborate with as many different organizations as possible and work in unity with all the different organizations. So there's so many survivors that have come to us and said, this happened to me and this is what I need. And I am always so proud of those survivors when they reach out, because for one, it's an honor to any time to get to walk alongside somebody and support them. And two, it takes a lot of courage for anyone to either share their story, or anyone to say, I have been through this and I'm looking for some support. So I'm always really happy to hear when different survivors come and say, is there something you guys can do, even if you weren't part of the intervention in my life?
No, and it's really a blessing that more survivors are coming to your organization, and then the care you're giving them, and how that's helping their lives. And so, have there been any like really amazing recovery stories you can share, like survivors that went on to live really incredible lives? Or, I'm sure it's such a rough journey to get there. Is there anything that stood out for you?
Yes, and I think sometimes people have that mentality of, once somebody has been through trafficking, that they'll never be able to go on and live out their dreams. And I have literally seen people go from complete hopelessness to hope. And there's so many survivor stories like that. If I was to share a couple of them, one of them, I'm so proud of her. I just talked to her yesterday, and I remember when I was on site when she was first rescued by law enforcement in that country. And I remember she had these heels on, and she was 13 years old, and they had dressed her up in very a small amount of clothing. And she was standing in the corner during this intervention, and she was scared and shaking. And we had brought everything from coloring books to teddy bears to things that they can have while that intervention is happening. So she had grabbed a teddy bear, went and was standing in the corner. And during that time, I was like, that girl just seems like she's so hurt. And you could see on her face how much pain she had gone through at such a young age. And fast forward a few years, and last year she started university, and she's going to school to become a social worker so that she can help other kids that have been through what she's been through. And obviously there's a lot of different pieces in between that day when she was 13 and then starting university of therapy and help and support. And But when we get the opportunity to send that paycheck to the university for that girl, because that was what she wanted to do with her life, is to become a social worker to help other children that have been trafficked. I remember when I first heard about it and tears just running down my face, because I can still visualize who she was, but I also know she's not in that situation anymore. And yesterday I got to talk to her, because it was 6 years since the time that she had been rescued. And in 6 years, she's literally a totally different person. She's confident. She has a amazing boyfriend who I put him through the ringer and drilled him really hard with questions, because I have that protective nature in me, and seems like such a great guy. And she says that he treats her so well, and to see her then also pursuing her dreams. So it's definitely like, I think the reason why I do what I do is because I believe that there's hope for everyone.
Yeah, and the first step really is talking about it. And, you know, as hard as that process is with everything involved, you know, I think sharing what happened with as many people as possible, like for me, you know, it just kept getting easier and easier. When you have the right support base, that just makes all the difference. I wouldn't be able to be on this journey without my partner. You know, and my family, they've been incredibly supportive. But something that was probably like the hardest part of processing all of this, you know, everybody in my family believes me wholeheartedly. Everybody that I've told believes me. But the only person who doesn't is my own father. And right now we're not on good terms or talking because of that, because I just can't have someone in my life that chooses not to support me or acknowledge that it happened. I think it's just too shocking for him as a parent that this happened to his own son. And I think a part of him feels responsible. But is there any survivor you've worked with that was maybe not believed by someone, like maybe their family or from wherever they were from and rescued from? Were there people that didn't believe them or still don't to this day?
Yeah. Well, and I'm really glad that you have your partner and that you've had lots of family members that have rallied around you and supported you, because you're right. I think a key component is it takes so much bravery to even say it and to talk about it to begin with. And then when you have people that say, there's no way that's true, you're making it up, or whatever reason they have to say, I'm not going to believe you, it's extremely painful. And that's really hard. And I think a lot of survivors don't even speak up because they're like, well, who's going to believe me? And yes, I've worked with survivors. One of the survivors I worked with, she was trafficked by her family, by both of her parents. And so when she started speaking up, a lot of her siblings didn't believe her. Some of her siblings believed her, some of her siblings didn't. And then a lot of the people in the community said that she was lying, making this up because her parents were wealthy and religious, and so there's no way that these people that come off as being so well put together could possibly traffic their own daughter. And so she has gone through a journey of feeling like she's lost a lot by sharing. She struggles with that sometimes of, I shared and I'm going on my healing journey, but I also lost so many of my family members who just said, I don't believe you. And that's an extremely painful process.
Right. And I think the reason that her siblings don't believe her is because they've put years of trust into their parents. And I think anybody that's going to be so close to you for so long, whether it's a friend or a family member, like you're always going to trust them if that level of trust has been so strong. My abuser was my dad's best friend. So for him, like the person that he trusted, my dad trusted for 20 years, that I think made it less believable for him. And I think the role that parents and adults play, you know, there's this tendency to deify adults and parents when we're kids. We're in this phase where we're not questioning adults. Like, would you say that that's like a really difficult reason to come to terms with the truth?
Yeah, I think it's very difficult when it's somebody that's close to you to believe that they would hurt somebody, and if it's your own child. The reality, though, is most people, obviously there's different situations, but a lot of people do get abused by a family member, an uncle, a grandpa, a best friend of the family. It's somebody that has access to children and access to teenagers. And so I was talking with a friend of mine recently, and he's in his 40s and he has 3 daughters. And he was talking to me about the work that we do at our rescue. And he was saying it's so scary because I have these 3 daughters, and the people that's most dangerous are the people I bring into their lives. And for him, he was aware that a lot of times it is a family member, it is a close friend that is going to abuse children. And I don't know how to even comfort somebody, because I'm like, yes, that's the reality of the situation. All I can say is try to have really open communication with your children. If something does happen to them, make sure that you communicate to them it was not their fault. Like you said, a really important piece to it is believe them and don't shame. And anytime a minor is abused by an adult, the adult is the person responsible. And I've worked with some teenagers where they have confusion because they were trafficked or sexually exploited by somebody that they knew, and they're like, well, part of me liked it or part of it felt good, where there's that confusing piece where they exploited that child's sexuality and manipulated it in a way. And so I would encourage people, whether somebody's a minor or over the age of 18, that it's so important to believe them, and it's so important to stand beside them and say, how can I help you?
Yeah. What does a survivor have? I mean, there's certain situations, but what does a survivor have to gain by lying about something? That's just what totally boggles my mind. And you have so much insight into kids and how their minds work, how what trauma they've dealt with, and this goes back before your work with OUR. I'm just curious, like, what drew you to work with underprivileged kids or just kids in these tough situations?
Well, I would say that a huge piece of it is my parents. I have 2 parents that they showed me consistently when I was growing up that it was important to reach out to those that are in need, and they gave of their services. My dad can fix cars, and he fixes people's cars for free all the time and loves to do it. He grows a garden just so that he can give food away to people that need extra food or might have food insecurity. And my mom is always willing to give a listening ear, and she consistently is giving people rides home from the grocery store that she doesn't know, which I still am like warning her. I'm like, Mom, you got to be careful. But she is always helping those that might not have a form of transportation. And my grandparents did the same thing, where I saw them consistently serving those. My mom's mom, my mom's parents, they have 8 children in their family, and all of my aunts and uncles have that heart of service. One of my cousins, they've adopted several children out of foster care. And so I've had lots of examples around me. And I really do give my family credit for any of the good in me. And also my faith in God, I would say, has encouraged me to serve those around me, because I know who I am, and I know I have so much love that I feel, and I know there's a lot of people that don't have that same love and knowing their worth and being so confident that they have a purpose here on this earth. And so if I can encourage just one child that they are incredible and amazing and speak truth and love into their life, then I think it's all worth it.
You're driven by knowing that there's a higher power and knowing that, that there is evil to fight. So I think that that's just so important. And like you said, so many survivors now coming to OUR, the number is growing. And for viewers, I just want to take a minute to talk about the movie The Sound of Freedom. If you saw that last year, that is based on the work that OUR is doing. Jim Caviezel plays Tim Ballard, the founder of OUR. And if you want to get the full raw story, there's also the documentary Operation Touissant. I highly recommend seeing both of those films. And so what is the impact that Sound of Freedom has had on the organization now that, are more survivors coming in as a result, or is there more support just for OUR in general now?
Great question. One of the things is, well, we don't financially gain from Sound of Freedom, but I will say the reason why I love movies that talk about trafficking and what's happening, whether that's a documentary. We have several documentaries out, and we were involved with different movies, but I think that it really does. Film helps educate people, and film helps people get curious about what's going on. And I think that it's so important for people to watch these types of films, because it does say, well, what actually is going on? What is trafficking? And it makes people wonder more about it. I hope that there are more survivors that continue to reach out to us because they see movies such as Sound of Freedom or other documentaries, so that we can provide services and support. And I also hope that when people see movies like that, even if they've never experienced any type of sexual abuse or trauma or trafficking, that they will say, well, what can I do? If there is kids that have been through this, what can I do? And I always encourage people to rise up to help these kids. It takes a global movement of people saying, I want to stop trafficking and I want to help survivors that have been through that. And I will say for myself, when I was a 13-year-old little girl coming from the farm into Brooklyn, New York, there was plenty of people that I still remember them saying, what do you think you're doing? You're just a child. You can't help other people. And for whatever reason, I had faith and belief that I could make a difference. And so whether you are a teenager thinking about how can I help, or you are a 90-year-old man saying, how can I help? I would say that there is room for everybody. So when you see these documentaries, you see these movies, my prayer is that it would be the movement to do something to support survivors through the process of their healing journey, especially for those that don't have anybody that's walking alongside them and helping them.
Yeah, I think these movies are really prompting more discussion about pedophilia and human trafficking. I mean, it was a box office hit. Like, it beat Indiana Jones at the time it was released. Like, there was just, and everybody was talking about it. And I remember when there was even like reports about like the theaters shutting down and having problems. Like, I remember the media attention that it was getting about it being like QAnon conspiracy. Like the fact that they were trying to smear a movie that has this, such an important message about human trafficking, that really says a lot about the culture that we're in. Has the organization faced like any scrutiny or censorship or people trying to stop you from what you're doing? Because it's happening a lot, I think, just from people stopping people from talking about it.
Yeah, I think there's definitely plenty of people that want to stop the conversation. One, being traffickers. They don't want this conversation to happen. And I think that a lot of people are unaware that there's also a movement in the United States to make pedophilia a thing that someone struggles with. I was speaking to a group of therapists once and talking about trafficking and talking about child abuse and all these different things, not being aware of what the conversation would be afterwards. And I had a group of therapists come up to me and they said, you need to stop talking about trafficking and sexual abuse against children, because if this is what they said that we want to make it legal for an 8-year-old to consent to sex with an adult. Because they said, if you can choose what flavor of ice cream you want, you can consent to having sex with an adult. And I was so mortified that that's where our culture was going and our society is going, is
disturbing.
That it's awful. And so I think that when those types of things start to happen, we need to have all of our red flags going off of what are we doing here in the US and how do we stand up against it. And it would also be to, again, that call that everyone needs to be involved in educating themselves on what grooming is, educating themselves on red flags, getting involved with helping children that have been through some type of sexual exploitation, human trafficking, because the opposite side is ready in full force and they are trying to make these different things legal and lower the age of consent to sex with an adult. And I think that's something that a lot of people are unaware that this is happening. And I think that's where some of the controversy comes with different documentaries and movies. Also, the controversy that was also brought up is that's not the only way that trafficking happens. And I would agree. I stand in agreement that the Sound of Freedom is one operation and one form of trafficking, and that does happen. I've personally been involved with that type of trafficking where a child is kidnapped. There's also a lot of trafficking that, like we've talked about, happens from a family member or a friend. And I think it's good to be aware of both sides of things. And that's where I would say with the anti-trafficking agencies of coming together, and OUR is not trying to say this is the only way trafficking happens. We are saying it happens from your neighbors, it happens from friends and family, and we have worked with kids that have gone through kidnapping situations where they are trafficked through that means as well.
Yeah, there's a tendency to, by institutions and industries to downplay the evil and the abuse. And I think this is why people can so easily be groomed or led to believe that being sexually abused, or even like something that's not as intense, but it's still like a form of abuse, there's a way to just brush that off. Like it's no big deal. Oh, this happens all the time. And then, child sexual abuse is the most egregious form of that evil. I think that's really when it gets to the worst extent. I think having these conversations is just so important, because there needs to be more awareness to see that, and to understand also these grooming tactics, because I think if it makes sense, I think we all have ways of being groomed or lured into situations that we have the power to say no to. So I think it's like being aware of trafficking and grooming and abuse, understanding that evil will ultimately play a better role in our lives and in our decision making, and looking out for our kids and not putting them in potentially dangerous situations. I think it's just it's definitely a good wake-up call to parents that might not put so much attention into these issues.
Yes, I think that's a great point, because if we turn away and we say, oh, it won't ever happen to me, it won't ever happen in my community, I think that there is a lot of misunderstanding in that, and that's just not the reality of where our nation is right now. We do have to be aware of grooming tactics and what people are doing, and we have to educate our kids at a much younger age. Unfortunately, a lot of kids, when they're exposed to different things via their smartphones or kids at school, is very young now, where it used to be 14, 15, 16, and now we're talking about elementary kids.
Right. And I think for the youth too, what is an increasing problem, and what I dealt with for so many years to cope with what happened to me, is substance abuse. I think that drugs, they play a role in the grooming process. At least that's what my abuser did for me, and it was kind of a way to disassociate from my feelings, or like my body being violated. Like, your body is a temple, and so you use these forms of escape to not feel. So how do you navigate substance abuse in working with your survivors, like survivors that have gone through that?
You're right. I do hear a lot of stories of how someone who's abusing somebody else is using drugs and alcohol to control them. Lots of people that will use drugs to get somebody addicted, and then exploiting the addiction to then exploit them sexually. We've worked with lots of survivors through detox programs. We've worked with lots of survivors that also hate substance abuse, and as soon as they're free from their person that's been abusing them, they say, I want nothing to do with that, because that is what somebody used in connection with abusing me. So I've seen everything from survivors that have struggled for years and years with substance abuse because that was a grooming tactic that somebody used. And I've seen survivors that the moment that they're free want nothing to do with it. And I don't think that there's not any condemnation on the survivor as far as where they're at in that spectrum. Substance abuse is such a difficult situation, and so we will walk alongside people if they're going through detox and help them get into detox programs. And there's never a shame or you're a bad person because of the addiction you have, because of what you were exposed to. And like you said, a lot of times substance abuse plays a role in disassociating because you're just trying to get through the situation, and you don't want to fully process the abuse that's happening to your body. And that's a very difficult side of somebody that's gone through trafficking that a lot of people don't see, or there's a lot of judgment on it from outside parties when they don't really understand the reason why substance abuse was a part of everything.
People get so dependent to not deal with that trauma, so there's like a block where you're not, it's a way to kind of like keep the conscious unconscious. It's definitely a way to escape, and I think the more that like we lean into the discomfort and work through it, that's for me. That's how it was. It was easier for me to be sober, and I think listening to other people's stories like that is what helped me realize what happened to me. My girlfriend was going to the Ghislaine Maxwell trial, and I went with her to listen in on a couple of the sessions. And when I was listening to other victims, that's when I started to process like, oh wow, like this is exactly what happened to me too. So I don't know if it's been helping with other survivors that you're working with, maybe to have heard from other people's stories, like through all of that healing.
Yes, and the situation that you went through makes total sense to me. I was working with a survivor. She was 14, and her aunt is the one who brought her to us for different support and services. And her aunt said, I didn't realize that I had been trafficked until I saw your guys' website and was reading about it on your guys' website of what trafficking is. And then I have my niece and I'm hearing her story, and she was like, oh my goodness, I was trafficked as a child and I'm not even realizing it until I'm in my 30s. And so I do think that it really does help when survivors that are ready and that's what they want, if they're sharing their story, it helps other people realize and put vocabulary and understanding onto what they've been through, especially if they've been trafficked and they didn't even have somebody that was saying you were trafficked, and hearing somebody else's story, such as the trials that you went to, it does really help put vocabulary and understanding into a situation that they've been through.
I just think it's so incredible, everything that you're doing. The reason I wanted to have you on this show is because I've been processing so much, and when I see what your organization is doing, it really makes me want to get involved. It really makes me want to help other victims in some way that I can. So what can people do to contribute to your organization? How can they get involved?
Well, there's lots of different ways. One is you can go to our website, sign up to be a volunteer. Different job postings we have posted on our website as well for people that want to go all in. I would say that if you want to get involved too, you can become a CASA, which is a court-appointed advocacy person for a child that is typically in foster care or has been through some extreme circumstances, oftentimes some type of sexual abuse. And anyone can do that. That's a program that's nationwide. Anybody can become a CASA. So, and that is the person that is specifically speaking up for that child in court, and such an important role. There is ways that you can get involved with kids that have been trafficked and are now in the foster care system. Oftentimes it's called therapeutic foster care, and you can be a mentor for them. You can be somebody who provides respite services where they just stay with you on the weekend. You can become a full-time foster parent for kids that have been through trafficking. I mentioned some of those other programs too, because yes, we are one organization and people can get involved with us, and I invite everybody to get involved with us. But I also want people to know that there are local places in everybody's cities of ways to get involved. There's not one state in the US that you can't get involved on a local level. And there's lots of other anti-trafficking organizations that are absolutely wonderful too. So I invite people to get involved with us through different means of volunteering, or if they feel like they want to apply for a job online, there's those options. But there's also lots of amazing anti-trafficking organizations. There's foster care in every city. There's becoming a CASA for children. So whatever somebody's resources, time, availability, energy, wherever they're at in their life, I would say there is a way for you to get involved in helping children, and helping children that have been through such awful circumstances. And don't hesitate. Don't think you're too young. Don't think you're too old. I just talked with a 13-year-old or 14-year-old that is doing a GoFundMe to help children that have been trafficked. And so there are all different kinds of ways. So you're never too young, you're never too old to get involved with helping survivors of trafficking.
Well, I'm going to be putting resources. I'll be putting links in the description for anybody to go take a look at OUR, consider making a donation. For viewers watching, I think it's incredible what OUR is doing. And if you want to contribute in any way, please visit their website, take a look at what resources they have. Before we wrap up, I guess my final question is, do you see child trafficking in the world coming to an end once and for all? I know that's a pretty bold question, but do you think there's a way to finally put a stop to all of this evil, even though it's hard to even fathom that happening because of just how prevalent it is?
I think our goal and our mission has to always be to eradicate trafficking. I think that has to be at the forefront of our minds, is how do we actually end human trafficking? And we have to be okay with the process of it doesn't stop tomorrow. And will it ever end in this world of child abuse? I don't have the answer to that, but I do have a strong conviction and passion to eradicate it and play my part in stopping trafficking.
Well, thank you so much for everything that you're doing and for taking the time to come on our show and have this incredible discussion. It's really been a pleasure.
Thank you so much for having me. It's an honor.